Tiffany Lorraine Galloway with another episode of the Resilient Mother podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about resilient overcomer, overcoming things, and how resilience helps us do that as mothers or to help our children overcome their challenges and struggles without taking away the consequences so they can build resilience. Kind of a tricky thing, right? Well, today, and my guest today is Dr. Shahana. She is a physician, speaker, and author, and we're going to speak to this from her point of view. Thank you so much for being here. Please tell us more about you.
It's such a pleasure being here. And I just loved what you said in the opening too, because I wish I had been listening to this podcast. I've got 3 boys. They're 9, 7, and 5. And although I know they're still young, when you're going through that really difficult time, and I think every age and stage has its own challenges. So I'm nowhere past the challenging time. But I think what you want is that community to feel like what I'm experiencing is not necessarily unique. A lot of people are in this boat. I want to feel this sense of camaraderie with other women and other parents who are going through this. And I want to hear the different definitions of what defines resiliency. And for me, the reason that I'm even here at all right now has to do with the biggest shame secret that I've been harboring since the age of 4. Now, to take a step back, I had what's called postpartum OCD, which is a type of condition that a lot of women have. We just don't talk about it. We don't talk about it because the types of thoughts that you have are extremely disturbing and distressing. And the reason I'm going there right away is because you asked me to introduce myself, but I can't introduce myself without adding the idea that I was a patient. Yes, I'm a physician. Yes, I'm a speaker. Yes, I'm a mother and an author, but I also was a patient. And that's the part that we kind of want to dance around. We don't really want to address the sticky stuff, the dark stuff, the blurry stuff. So for me, I actually had this condition since the age of 4 or 5, a condition called pure OCD, and it just morphed and graduated into postpartum OCD. I knew the diagnosis after I went to medical school. I did what every good medical student does, is I ignored what I had, and I just decided to treat other people because, once again, you think I can study my way out of it, or I can just fix myself. Neither of those things worked. And it wasn't until having my first son that I had to come face to face with this diagnosis. It wasn't until I felt like my family would be better off if I wasn't here. That was the turning point. That was where all of that shame came from. So in some ways, it's important to start. That is the beginning for me. And that's kind of it all sounds really sexy to say what you are and you're having this book come out and you're a TEDx speaker. But none of that would have been possible if I hadn't had the courage, which I think is the foundation of resiliency, to actually say the words postpartum OCD.
Yeah. And I think we all may have a struggle that takes that level of honesty, but it often takes rock bottom for us to realize that rock bottom actually has a basement.
Yes.
And when you hit there, you have no choice but to face yourself. And when you face yourself there, you've got to go, okay, something has to change here. Something has to be different. And we've shared a lot of those stories here. And it's interesting how motherhood is often the catalyst for that, because it's not about you anymore. It's about your family that you're building and your children and showing up for them in the way that you really want to. I don't know a whole lot about OCD, so I'm really curious. I've dealt with other things like PTSD and some other paranoia and some stuff that happened with some of the circumstances I've been through. So if I don't know I'm OCD, what are some thoughts I would be having? What are some symptoms of that?
The media portrays OCD like the most common version of OCD, which is, checking a lock multiple times or washing your hands because you've got fearful of contamination. It's often used in jest, right? This idea that you're doing thing a number of times or it has to be in a perfect sequence. So yes, that's a very stereotypical type of OCD. And I think that's a lot easier to spot if you see someone engaging in those types of behaviors. And I have many patients who do. And needless to say, it can wreak havoc on your life because you can't lead a normal life if you're spending all your time engaging in these types of nulling activities. Pure OCD is quite different. It doesn't have any of those compulsions. You don't have any of the behaviors. You just have the horrible intrusive thoughts. And the reason why it's so common in the postpartum period is that the thoughts often have to do is could hurt or harm come to your child, either at the hands of yourself involuntarily, obviously, or anything to do with the idea of some kind of danger coming to your child. right? So
Yeah.
and there's a lot of truth to that, because now you're suddenly released from the hospital with this being, and you're supposed to protect this like the most fragile flower that it is. You know nothing about gardening. Like, let's be honest, like, you know nothing about that. Take
There's
care
no
of
manual. Nope. Nope. Good
nothing.
luck.
Like, I was so like, had to read, like, how do I change a diaper, and where do I get a stroller from, and all the practical stuff. I didn't grow up with nieces and nephews, so I didn't know that. And I kept waiting for my motherhood instinct to kick in, and I'm sure it was there. I just really believed that some force would take over. It never felt like it quite was. Maybe the sleep deprivation has something to do with that. I don't know. So the postpartum OCD especially is the intrusive thoughts about hurt or harm coming to your child, mainly if the mom feels like involuntarily they could do something to do that to their child. And that's why there's so much shame and stigma attached, that no one's going to be talking to their doctor or healthcare practitioner about it, because of fear of someone taking the child away. So what happens is that you suffer in silence, right? You suffer with anxious thoughts, depressive thoughts, and oftentimes, until someone looks you in the eye, it's really hard to admit what you're feeling. Unlike the most common types of OCD, where you're going to see all of these behavioral changes, especially with moms, and it can happen to moms and dads, I should say. It's not just only the moms. When it comes to these intrusive thoughts, they're so much more silent. And with that silence, they fester a lot. So I think I've now, and I actually just was able to give a talk at the Women's Mental Health Day at Yale University. And because this is such an important topic, right? And they chose the topic of postpartum OCD. And it was so well received, because once again, this is why I started off the dialogue in this conversation about talking about the hard stuff, right? It's really easy to talk about the easy stuff. We can even define resiliency and give stories that make ourselves look really good. It's really hard to give stories that are really hard to tell, right? And I think that's the difference. Even when I gave my TEDx talk in 2019, I purposely didn't use the words OCD. And I joke a lot on podcasts, and I think that there is an element of truth in this, working in the mental health profession, because I do that every day. I think post-COVID, you could tell someone anxiety, depression, and they often do this. They'll lean in. They're kind of there for you, right? They're along for that ride. The minute you use words like suicidality, bipolar, schizophrenia, OCD, paranoia, delusions, dissociations, it's like this. It's like, what? It's too crazy. It's too much, right?
Yeah.
So I went with the safety. I said panic attacks, anxiety, depression, because it felt safer to say that than to say something like OCD. And that was part of the truth. But I still feel, by now telling the whole truth, it just feels so much better, because there's nothing more to hide. And in fact, the response has been so supportive, and the response has been one of, oh my goodness, me too. Or I know someone has that, right? So we feel like we can help each other. So going back to the theme of this podcast, perhaps part of true resiliency, to be truly resilient, is to tell that whole truth and not just to leave out parts of the story, which is easier said than done.
Well, how can you truly overcome it if you don't go to the depths of it? If you don't go to the root of it?
Yeah.
How
Absolutely.
can you heal it? How can you change it? How can you do it? And that has to be that honesty with yourself.
Yeah.
And even with your kids, I think
Yes.
realizing if your child is struggling with something, that's a
Yes.
bit scary. And there's more of that today than ever with
Yes.
mental health issues with our
Yes.
children, because of the last few years and because
Yep.
of technology and because of the things that are going on. I think
Yes.
we're more aware, and we're willing to embrace our humanity at a new level,
Yes.
and just really want to say, no, I want to be well. And I'm going to embrace the fact that maybe I'm not okay right now. And maybe my kid's not okay right now. And there's something I can do about it instead of be silent.
And it's this dichotomy between us accepting our humanity and trying to accept our own mental health, but not wanting our kids to suffer, right? So that we do everything to protect and bolster and helicopter and lawnmower, because I can feel the feelings because I've had to do the work, fine, but I don't want that for my kid. And I fall into this trap over and over and over again. And what all we're doing is in some sense is creating more fragileness, right? Because we're doing everything for them or protecting everything from them, right? And it's this very fine balance of supporting versus enabling. And one of the best questions I like is this situation, whatever situation your child is dealing with, is it manageable or unmanageable? Is it manageable or unmanageable? I love that question because this comes from the Dr. Lisa podcast. She's an amazing child psychologist. She's a 3-time New York bestselling author. I want to give credit where credit is due, but she talks a lot about this concept of, are you struggling in school because you've had a bit of a conflict with the teacher? That's probably pretty manageable. You probably can go up to that teacher and have a discussion on your own. You don't need your mom and your dad to come in, depending on what age you are. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Are you being bullied to a point that you're not eating, you're not sleeping, you're not going to school? Perhaps that is now more on the someone needs to step in. But I think we are so used to constantly stepping in. And I'm just speaking for myself, right? I am the step in, protect, saran wrap my kids. And sometimes, a lot of the times, that's in my interest. That's not in their interest, right? So and I work with high risk youth. I work with youth in general. And I think that we start to see where resilience will start to peter off in some ways because they haven't had those opportunities to test and try and fall and fail.
And they have to know that failure is not fatal.
Mm-hmm.
They have to know that it's not the end if they don't measure up to some unrealistic standard that they see on social media. They have to know that they have value just as they are and for who they are. But I think too, we're not understanding that what exposure these kids are getting at such a younger age.
Yep.
My daughter this last year was into things and understood things and was exposed to things I wasn't exposed to until my first year of college.
Yeah.
And it wasn't from my lack of effort as a parent. It's just the world we live in today and the other kids that she was exposed to and their backgrounds and what they went through. And we really had to learn that it's fine that she wants to be compassionate with everyone and those struggling that with similar strugglers or different struggles. My kids are very inclusive with who they care about. But we did have to get to a point where we had to put boundaries around some of those people. Because it was going beyond where 2 children should be dealing with it. An adult really should have been involved. And we even had to go as far as get the school involved because it was, do you understand this is going on among this age group and that they are trying to take care of each other instead of, no, somebody's mental health is to the point they need an adult. That's not something 2 kids should be dealing with together, nor should anyone be putting that burden on someone else who isn't a professional or who isn't trained.
Well said. And that hits a nail on the head, right? And that age approach, if they are 25 and 30 or 40, maybe they could easily deal with that fine. But if they are young, then that's unmanageable. Then we've crossed that, right? I think that's for the adult to help determine. But part of that is knowing what's on their screen. What are they seeing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've had tragic circumstances of parents finding out too late what their kids were exposed to, or only if I wish I had known. And then it also becomes, well, you can't police your kid, right? that's also so I get it. That access to all sorts of information, forget wisdom, information is very, very, very rich. And I think that becomes so problematic because you're right. The news cycle, when I was growing up, I'd watch the 6 o'clock news, the news would go off and that's it. The news is every second of every day now. You could watch and it could be, and it's usually not a good news story. It's usually a bad news story, right? And then you mentioned something really important too. It's even if they look and they see someone in the Olympics that's achieved incredible fame and they think that, well, I just want to be that and you see that as well too. Parents often fall into the trap of my identity, my worth as a parent is destined upon what my child will become, right? If they are the doctor, lawyer, gymnast, whatever the case might be, that I have done a good job. And you see inklings of this when in the schoolyard pickup, oh, my kid plays pro this, or, we're just training every day, they're training 20 hours a week in dance. And you can start to see this element of taking on your child's identity. And one of the things that is really important is for your kids to see that you have a life of your own that you've cultivated and that you are a whole person. They are adding to that, but you don't need them to become a whole person because that's modeling, right? That's really important. Easier said than done. I'm not saying any of this is easy, but that's also, I think women, we have to stop feeling guilty for starting to cultivate, even in a small way, things that start to bring you joy and starts to light your fire.
Yeah, we have to embrace that they're their own unique individual with their own agency, their own choices, their own interests, and their own gifts to develop whether they choose to or not. All we are is the support for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the tricky thing, is how to be supportive today, because it used to be kids say suicidal in school, you take them aside, you naughty it. Well, the problem with that is what started this group of kids at her school. They had nowhere to talk about it. They had no safe space. So they tried to create that with each other. And so I'm glad we're more open to talking about these things, because the minute we silence somebody from being able to express what they're feeling, then they think they're wrong. And then they take on that emotion. I feel bad, therefore I am bad. And don't get the chance to separate those things, that you're experiencing something or a symptom of something outside of you, or something happened to you. It's not who you are. And when they're developing that identity in this now 12, 13, 14 space, we're really seeing that confusion. That they aren't separating all the emotions and the emotional ride and the hormones from who they are. You don't lose yourself. You're just going through something at this time.
Absolutely. And it comes back to that idea, like we went through this with other dialogues. I'll say that if you talk about this, and they will engage in that behavior, right? We've gone through that trend, and suicidality happens to be another trend. And science after science, study after study shows that that is absolutely not the case, right? Like, this is where you start to, and I love working with adolescents, because they are very blunt and honest. If I sit in front of an adolescent and say, well, I'm just wondering if you might have some thoughts that, no, don't do that. Are you having these thoughts? Like, just say it as it is, right? We respect you for it. They will answer you, usually completely honestly too. If you show the confidence at saying that, there's no shame in saying those words, right? I think that's the part of the modeling, that going, no, this is what it is, say it as it is. And then you can also expect a straightforward answer. But if you're coming at it dodging all these pylons, it becomes really hard for them to go, is this normal? Like, why are they acting this way? Right. So,
and I love that you brought up shame, because as a parent, you could be taking that on too. And I think the best thing you can do with a child who is struggling with a mental health issues, you got to be okay first. You got to get yourself centered. You got to get yourself regulated, because what they need is someone who's present and loving on them, whatever they're dealing with. You are just there. And it may mean being there silently, but they need to know that you're there and you're their safe space. And if you're not even safe with yourself because you're so triggered, or you're so in shame and guilt and fear, you can't be that safe space for them, even though you may really, really want to be. And I will say, different people handle different circumstances better than others. But if you've dealt with your own stuff, you're more likely to be able to show up in the way that your child may need. And to admit that, like, you can't do it alone. Like, really, you need help. Is okay. And if you're not okay and you need some help, ask for it. But let's not leave people sitting in shame, vulnerable, not knowing what to do, and not the skills, because we're worried about how it will reflect on us. I think I'd rather be more concerned about the child being well than how it's going to reflect on me when someone finds out that we're dealing with this. And I really hope the stigma will continue to go away, so that we can take care of it and nip it in the bud, and not have it catch us as parents off guard, or have it go on so long that it's harder to actually correct. Because the sooner that we can address it, the sooner that they can start healing, and they're not in their 40s going back and healing these patterns, or discovering they're able to move forward in the right direction.
So and what you said was so important. It's letting them know that you are there. It's almost like, you know how I used to play those parachute games with the rainbow parachute, and you kind of come under, like, you know that you as a parent are that parachute. Whether they choose to go under or not is their prerogative, but you are there. You are holding that pair. I used to love that game. But that's kind of the idea, right? It's like you've got this bubble under around them too. A lot of the times, teenagers, especially, pathology or not, we just know that the prefrontal cortex develops a lot slower than the limbic system. Like, the emotional side actually develops from back to front, right? So their emotions are going, whoa, everywhere too, but they don't have the focus, reasoning, understanding to make sense of what's happening. So you just have haywire here, but not really any logic necessarily on the other side. So that seesaw is a lot of not balanced. So what happens then, it becomes like a glitter jar, or like a snow globe, which is kind of always shaken up. And sometimes it's just, you don't go to that snow globe and go, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? You're just shaking it up more, right? Really? And I do that, right, to my kids now. You sure you're okay? It doesn't work, right? Let the glitter settle, right? And the best way you let it settle is to say, okay, you need some water. You need to go for a walk. I'm here. I'll give you some space. It's that push, pull, push, pull. But I love that idea. It's just, yeah, I'm here when you're ready.
Well, and I love what you just mentioned because it's giving them some positive outlets. It's giving them some
Mhm.
tools, but it's giving them agency in
Yes.
that moment. Even in the
Yes.
dark moments,
Yeah.
giving them some agency on what do you need to cope? Because they
Yeah.
have to figure that out for themselves. And it's going to be different for every single kid what they turn to.
Yeah.
And it may be different than what you would turn to. It may be different than how you would picture it. So you have to also be the one to allow them to explore
Yes.
and not to judge. Maybe they're going to draw some graphic pictures that maybe disturb you, but think about it this way, they're not in here anymore for them. They're finding an outlet, or maybe they
Exactly.
need to go punch something or
Yeah.
scream
Yeah.
or whatever it is they need to do that we need to do too to process things.
Yes.
And if
Yes.
you can just be there and be and they're getting it out.
Yeah.
Let them
Yeah.
find something to get out, because if they don't get it out, that's where the addictions come in. That's where the bad behaviors come in. And those aren't things that you can just stop. It's
No.
meeting a need. So let
It,
them learn how to meet their needs,
yeah.
even in those hard times now, so that they can do it moving forward. And know that, sometimes it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. They may figure out something and it didn't quite work, and now they've got to try something else. It's a process. We're constantly evolving and changing, and there's no point where it's just going to be easier. There's always going to be hard times in life. We can't take them away. We can't put them in bubble wrap like you were talking about earlier. We
Exactly.
want to desperately, but they won't be able to make it in this fast
Mhm.
changing world, or be able to put themselves in a place of seeing opportunity and staying curious with
Yeah.
how fast the world is changing now, especially if we don't set them up with the ability to choose for themselves in those moments, and to know that they're loved no matter what. They have that source of love, whatever their process is, whatever they choose,
Exactly.
however long it takes to get there.
Yeah.
You're that source and pillar of love for them.
Ex- and that and getting all of that right takes a lot of inner work because it's so easy to use your kids as a mirror.
Yeah.
So easy to use. Because whatever they do is a constant reflection on what I should be or society should be putting on me or them.
So I lost you for just a second. Say that again.
So it's the idea that I think your kids, it's really easy to picture them like a mirror because whatever that they do, it's a reflection on what I should be doing, what society expects me to doing, or where I fall short, right? My kid's the star of the basketball team. I feel like I'm winning. My kids failed the last umpteenth spelling test. I don't feel so good about myself, right? So we need to stop acting like our kids are constantly a reflection of us, and that we can only stop doing that when you feel like you are a whole person independent of your child's progress.
And also just jumping to conclusions about what something means. That's why I
Yes.
wanted to ask you about OCD. I
Yeah.
don't know what pure OCD is. I've
Yes.
never heard about it before. Get curious, go deeper. Don't be scared, because the more understanding that you have, the less scared you're going to be. And that's with the kids too, especially teenagers. The more quiet I can be, the better answers I get in understanding what's actually going on. When I try to give advice, when I try to put my idea of what's going on it, I'm always usually way off base on what's actually going on. And it may be what I think it's about, and it's about something completely else. And sometimes I don't get the privilege of being in on what it's about, but I
Yeah.
just let them know I'm there. And that really seems to help, is just the idea that you're there as the parent. And sometimes we have situations where all we can do is love on our kids and pray for them.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and sometimes that feels like the worst case scenario, but I find comfort in it, the idea
Yes.
that God knows my child better than I do, so
Yeah.
I at least have that source to go to, and
Yes.
I can trust my gut, and I can
Yes.
trust him to guide me in the way that I need to go for my child.
Uh, I think one day in life, you will have to admit that you don't control life.
Yeah.
It's coming for you. So sometime you either get it early or you get it later. So, that idea of there is a certain act of submission there. There's a certain act of faith that you're taught. All of that, all of those elements, I think, are intertwined in resiliency.
Mhm. And the ability to overcome.
Yeah.
And the overcomer story that I like that you're sharing today is something that maybe we didn't want to look at, but it is something that needs to be overcome.
Yeah.
The stigma around some of these things,
Yes.
the idea that you know, you have to act like you're always okay and that you didn't struggle and that you weren't there. Well, wouldn't I more rather be with someone who's gone through it than someone who's just textbooked it? Like,
Complete.
wouldn't I rather have someone who can validate my feelings and the
Yeah.
symptoms that I'm having than someone who has an idea of what that might be like?
Yeah.
I think that's something that I'm glad we're embracing more of, is that depth
Yes.
of our humanity of, you know, I've been through hard things and I want to help you get through it faster.
Yes.
I want you to help your child get through it faster.
Yeah.
We need to embrace each other and help each other with this knowledge and experience that we have, instead of isolate or think we're different or think that we're unique somehow. Somebody out there's dealing with it. Someone else out there has OCD. Someone else out there has a child with mental health illnesses. And let's
Exactly.
open that conversation up so you don't feel like you're dealing with it alone.
You don't have, I always tell my youth, I'm like, you are unique as a snowflake, but not in this. Like, you know, like you are beautiful. And like, I don't want to take away your uniqueness, but you also are not unique in this. A lot of that, like you can feel their shoulders start to relax and they start to lean in. They're like, okay, because let's be honest, nobody wants to be the only one. Like, it's like having a rash that no one's seen. Like, oh, like nobody wants that, right? So if I can be the doctor, I call it, you know, I call it the nanosecond effect. For me, it's this idea that when a patient tells you something really critical or important or emotional or heavy, you know, they can tell a mile away what my reaction is. Is it like, I'm hungry, I want to go for lunch, or I want to have coffee, or I just get out of my room? Or is it like this subtle lean forward, this open body language, this tell me more? And I think it's up to healthcare practitioners or whoever is in that chair, in that role, to consciously practice that too, because you don't know how many months, years it's taken for that patient to finally gather the courage to say whatever they're about to tell you. And only because I've been in that patient chair do I know now what it feels like.
Absolutely. We have to honor their truth and meet them where they're at,
Yeah.
every step of the way, for sure. Any last thoughts as we wrap up? I've absolutely loved the authenticity of this conversation. I feel like is really important today, especially for our youth.
No, I think whenever I have these conversations, I tend to have aha moments, like picturing that parachute over our kids or looking at our kids like the mirror. And I think for me, I live in the world of analogies, right? In the world of color and pictures. I can see that in my head. So if you are like that and you can try to take those images away, because you might not remember what we say, but you might remember the image that we've created. And hopefully, just like me, your brain might work that way. And the next time you find yourself in a sticky situation, you can go back to that parachute image or that mirror image and think to yourself that you're not alone.
And I guess I have one last question because I'm just curious. What was the most effective thing that helped you once you finally asked for help with your OCD?
Yeah. Yeah. What took it down probably by about a good 50 to 70% was coming clean, was actually talking about it, was talking to my parents about it and having more open conversations with my husband about it, and writing. That's in
Mm,
the book that's coming out in September called Feel Better. That's in the book. So there was, my armor was an armor of having to be perfect so nobody could see the tattered
mm,
and what I perceived as holes in my armor, right? So if I was perfect, then that would be the biggest distraction from the OCD. And suddenly, if I could lead with the OCD, I didn't have to be perfect anymore. And
mm,
that was a weight off. If there still is a role for medication, medication to me was a huge piece of it. Not easy to have to, now it's so easy for me to sign prescriptions. Now I know how easy it is to take a prescription. It's not easy to put something in your body, right? So I honor that as well when I talk to my patients, not just like, here's a prescription and go. No, wait a second, right? Everybody feels differently about putting something into their body. And then counseling was another big piece of that too. So it's kind of those three-pronged things, and some take more weight at certain times in my life. And also realizing that mental health is not a rash. Like, it's not solved with a cream and it goes away. Like, to me, mental health is this tug of war, this constant push pull depending on what's in your life. I don't think my brain has a loop that makes the OCD more prominent. With stressful times, it's worse. So will it ever go away? Probably not. But it's learning how to manage that. And
yeah.
just like if somebody has back pain or, shoulder pain, can I admit to someone I'm having a really rough day because of my OCD, and saying that sentence without any shame, right?
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, listeners. I hope this helped you feel like you're not alone and maybe gives you the courage to maybe face something that you might be holding back on so that you can open yourself up to being completely authentic and free and open by letting go of something that might be holding you back. And maybe will unlock you to the mother that you really want to be and maybe help you have the skills and the tools to help that child that needs you at this time. All right. I believe in you. Believe in yourself. God bless. And we will see you at the next episode of the Resilient Mother Podcast.